The Middle East has long proved an impossible challenge for American presidents, and it's unlikely to be any different for Joe Biden. His challenge is how to retain influence over regional actors while at the same time de-escalating conflicts in places like Syria, Yemen and Iraq. There's also the issue of Iran and its nuclear program. Kate Fisher has more on what Biden's first 100 days in office tell us about his policy plans for the region.
America has thousands of soldiers spread across the Middle East, but Joe Biden signaled that he wants to shift US foreign policy focus towards Asia.
What President Biden shares with President Trump and President Obama before him is a desire to diminish the American involvement, particularly military involvement in the Middle East, and to focus more on Asia. And in particular, of course, the rivalry with China has become a bigger and bigger part of American foreign policy.
But there's also a lot he doesn't share with his predecessor.
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
The most important one that he's stepping really carefully on is getting back into an agreement with Iran on Iran's nuclear program. But even regarding Israel, we've seen the Biden administration restoring U.S. assistance to the Palestinians. We've also seen a change in U.S. policy towards the war in Yemen, as they say, recalibrating a bit the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia.
That has been a delicate recalibration. On his first visit to the State Department as president,
it's great to be here with you.
Joe Biden pulled U.S. backing for the Saudi-led conflict in Yemen.
This war has to end. And to underscore our commitment, we are ending all American support for offensive operations in the war in Yemen.
But he stopped short of punishing Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, despite releasing an American intelligence report which said the leader approved the killing. The Biden administration knows it needs all the allies it can get as it tries to shift its focus from the Middle East while still ensuring America's interests remain protected.
It's still a highly unstable region where if we are going to pull out militarily and focus our attention elsewhere, it will create a vacuum which we have to be concerned about in terms of how it's going to be filled. And Russia, Turkey, Iran, and China are all kind of looking for ways in which they can take advantage of this.
There's hope that a Trump administration achievement could help. President Biden plans to build on his predecessor's work in establishing the Abraham Accords, agreements which normalized relations between Israel and other Arab countries.
It's helpful for the U.S. to be able to position its regional security role in the Middle East as more of a supportive role of collaborating partners rather than always having to be the overall leader of that effort. That's actually beneficial for the broader shift of American attention and resources toward the Indo-Pacific.
But Joe Biden knows that full shift can only truly come once the US is no longer consumed by its entanglements in the Middle East. It's a challenge that's frustrated American presidents for more than 60 years. Kate Fisher, CNA, Washington.
Ambassador Dennis Ross is with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He joins us now. Ambassador, thank you for your time. Firstly, how different are Mr. Biden's Middle East policies compared to his predecessors?
Well, I think there is some continuity, obviously, because, as your report indicated, there is a desire to reduce the American military footprint. There is a desire to, I think, lessen the level of American engagement in Middle Eastern conflicts. But there's also a recognition that this is a region that is difficult to ignore. And when you ignore it, it has a way of imposing itself on the United States. So what we see with Joe Biden is a desire to have the priority elsewhere. In many respects, the way President Trump put it was not so much to put the priority elsewhere, but in a sense to have the U.S. simply withdraw from the region. Biden, I think, is trying to balance what are our interests in the region on the one hand, with a sense that the Indo-Pacific area is significantly more important to us now. The competition with China is significantly more important. We don't want to be distracted from those higher priorities by what goes on in the Middle East, and yet we have to manage what goes on there so that it somehow doesn't pull us back in with worse options and at a higher cost.
Ambassador, Mr. Biden's been very clear in his first 100 days to continue to reach out and engage with America's allies. But how concerned are they about his attempts to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal?
Well, the Israelis, the Saudis, the Emiratis are concerned about it, not because they're against controlling the Iran nuclear program. Obviously, they would like to see that. What most concerns them is that once you're back in the JCPOA, once sanctions are lifted, Iran will have very little incentive either to do a follow-on nuclear deal or, in their eyes, to change their behavior in the region. On the contrary, if they have more resources available, the fear is Iran will step up their activities, will become even more threatening. When they're not under sanctions, if they can create a problem when they're not under sanctions, it'll be much greater than when they are. So that's the concern that these countries have. The challenge for the Biden administration will be to say, here's why it's good for us to get control over the Iranian nuclear program, stretch out its breakout time again, put it back in a box. And here's how we can also retain our leverage on the Iranians so that they will still have an incentive to do a follow-on agreement. And here's what we can do with you to blunt what they're doing in the region. Right now, the countries in the region are going to need to hear not only what the administration is prepared to say, but also what the administration is prepared to do with them to deter what the Iranians are doing in the region. It's this concern about Iran, in a sense, having no incentive to change its behavior once it gets sanctions relief that is really most prominent in the eyes of the countries of the region. And it's really up to the administration to explain how it will be able to affect Iran's behavior even after the JCPOA has been resumed.
In another issue, Mr. Biden is pushing to restore U.S. aid to Palestinians. What will that mean for ties with Israel?
I don't really think that has much of a dramatic effect on the relationship with Israel. Israel's priorities right now do relate to Iran. The more they find the administration addressing the concerns they have there, that will be the most important issue, number one. And there just was this week several different Israeli teams were in Washington who were meeting the most senior officials here. And those discussions actually went, I think, pretty well. I think on the issue of aid to the Palestinians, there isn't an objection to aid to the Palestinians, but there certainly is a desire for, when there's aid to the Palestinians, to see that there's also some Palestinian responsiveness. But the question of aid to the Palestinians is not something that's uppermost in the minds of the Israeli government.
Another area of concern, perhaps, Ambassador Ross, is the United States' relationship with Saudi Arabia. I mean, the country is a regional power, but U.S.-Saudi ties have been growing increasingly strained.
Well, I think what's interesting here is the administration has tried to strike a balance. On the one hand, it did release the intelligence report. The Congress had mandated the intelligence community to issue a report on the killing of Khashoggi. And the Trump administration refused to issue the report. The Biden administration issued the report. The report drew the conclusion that there was high confidence that the Crown Prince had been responsible for the killing. Now, those who wanted the report released also wanted there to be some punishment meted out towards the Crown Prince or towards Saudi Arabia. That didn't happen. And I think the reason that didn't happen is because there's a recognition on the part of the administration that we have many interests in the Middle East and beyond the Middle East, whether it's oil, whether it's counterterror, whether it is promoting stability there, whether it is countering the Iranians. All these issues, including trying to promote peace between Arabs and Israelis, all these issues depend upon the Saudis playing a role. We really can't achieve any of them in a way that is, I think, responsive to our interests if the Saudis don't play an active participatory role. So I think the Biden administration understood that on the one hand, and on the other, it wanted to make a statement that there would no longer be a blank check for the Saudis in our relationship. I think what we see is an effort to balance the relationship. I think there is work to be done in terms of establishing no surprises on either side, some boundaries in the relationship, of making it clear that we will, in fact, address the real security needs of the Saudis. Excuse me. All these are things that I see the Biden administration emphasizing it wants to do. We're still 100 days into the administration. It's still in the position of establishing a lot of what it's going to do. Many of the people who will be responsible for acting on these policies within the administration have not yet been confirmed. So I do think you'll see an effort to strike a balance in the relationship, preserve the relationship. It's interesting that Mohammed bin Salman gave a very long interview this past week on Saudi television, in which, when he was asked about the United States, he said, we agree with the Americans on 90% of the issues. Like with any family, there are some disagreements. It was, from his standpoint, you could see he's also trying to manage the relationship.
All right, Mayor, thanks for your thoughts this evening. Ambassador Dennis Ross from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy.